Hello, and welcome to Arbors of Harbour for April. I am recovering from a cold at the moment, so I'm just going to try and make this one quick. I don't have as much voice as I normally would have, and it's been a while since we've done a clap, so let's... Alright, here's everything for April. 7 books, 1 for each category. You know the drill. We'll just dive right into it. Book 1, this is On Premise. This is H is for Hawk by Helen Macdonald. This is... No, this is the aesthetic cover one, and it is a pretty aesthetic cover. This is a non-fiction book about a woman who, after losing her father, decides to get really into falconry and to train a goshawk, which is one of the renowned to be one of the least well-behaved hawks, and to teach it how to follow instructions and things like that. It's interesting. I didn't think that they would spin a story about learning how to train a goshawk for this long, but it's pretty good. I do like the development of the narrator and the growing confidence that they show throughout the course of the text, and it's very emotional and personal for something that could have been very academic. So I think that's quite a success in that part. I also learned just a lot of random facts about a lot of random things that I didn't think this book would touch on, especially the medieval author, T.H. White, who was writing about King Arthur and Camelot, and how that factors all into hawks and factors into English culture. I thought that was very interesting. But it is also... I felt like it's a bit too long for what I was trying to do. A lot of scenes felt a bit repetitive, and the arc of the narrative is at its heart a very simple one. So I give this a 3 out of 5. Book 2, this is my Sloper. Can you believe I've not read Norwegian Wood yet? This is a very well-known text by a very well-known author, and it's very different from his usual works. So Haruki Murakami is known for writing bizarre, surreal, magic realism set in Japan, often with his little quirks and tropes. And Norwegian Wood is, funnily enough, it's the novel that blew him up in terms of Western recognition, but it's also one that's the most different from his style. It doesn't have really any magic elements to it at all. It's a nostalgic story about a young man thinking about his time at university, his relationships with a young woman whose partner was also the narrator's friend who took his own life, and the questions of mental illness and wellness and how to have meaningful relationships in this growing amorality of modern culture. And yeah, I liked it. It's good. It's the thing I remember most about this novel is the ending made me so angry. I was getting misty-eyed, right? I was on the train to work and I was looking around going like, no one's going to notice me if I start crying, right? Because it's very good. The prose hits on all of the emotional heartstrings just so well, and then the ending just kind of just ruins it. It's like immediately after finishing this book I had to Google what was the point of the ending, and to me I feel like it's just an exercise in saying that this book is an intellectual affair and not an emotional one, right? They're not here to make you feel feelings. They're here to actually make you think and critique this narrator's actions. Which, okay, fine, I get it, right? Cool. But just let me feel the feelings. Oh, I was so mad. I was so angry. But I think if you are in the mood for a more thoughtful romance story, 90% of this book is quite good. The interactions of the characters are very interesting. The dialogue, once you get used to it, is really enjoyable. I find that Murakami, he defaults to writing about flawed masculine narrators and damaged feminine counterparts, and very much the theme is the inability of the flawed masculine narrator to really do anything or to help the person who needs help. And that reinforced gender trope is not always the most enjoyable, but it is something that in the past I would have really loved. I think that's a trope that, teenage me would have been right over, so I had to own that a little bit. If that's what you're okay with, and if you've read the content warnings for this book, there's all lots of content warnings, and you're okay with that, it's a very enjoyable read. I would give it a 4 out of 5. One thing that's very cool too is this cover. So it's named after a famous song by the Beatles, and the cover is trees, but it's also 3 people, and they're standing facing different directions. I think what's so interesting about the structure of this novel is that so many times we have triplets, right? We have 3 characters together in the same space, and it represents for the narrator or for any of the characters a kind of divergence, whether they pick one or the other, whether they align their values with one or the other. I think structurally it's so interesting, and it's represented in this cover really well. That's Norwegian Wood. Book number 3. I'm so exhausted thinking about it. Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. Often called the worst one, and I thought I would be a contrarian. I'm planning to read all of them this year, but I was planning to be a contrarian and be like, actually, Mansfield Park is good, guys. It's not. If you think Mansfield Park is the best Jane Austen novel, you're probably a Jane Austen scholar, right? You probably are reading her works for something other than enjoyment, because this is not an enjoyable book. This is very slow. And even of her own work, I think Jane Austen wanted Mansfield Park, following Sense and Sensibility and Pride and Prejudice, she wanted this to be a more serious book. She wanted it to be a more thematic book. And as a result, it's not fun. It's not funny. It's not interesting. It's full of these little tiny social details. It's about a young woman named Fanny who finds herself in the care of an aunt in a much richer household than her own standing. And because of this, she gets constantly reminded that, oh, you're lesser than everybody else, right? You have less standing in this family, you have less value as a human being. She's constantly kind of put down and treated as lesser to all of her peers. And she just takes it. She's not a fiery narrator like all the other, or what we expect of Austen. She's instead very passive, very victimized by this circumstance. And while we are meant to feel for her, at times we also kind of just go like, well, where's this going? Because if you have a passive narrator, what even happens in the plot, right? Things just happen to her. And you don't feel like there's really any kinetic push in any direction. You don't really know where it's going or what's happening. You're just waiting for events to occur, which is just less compelling as a reading experience compared to something like Pride and Prejudice, where the narrator is determined for something, right? Instead of following a character's journey to a destination, instead we just watch stuff happen to Fanny, and just like, why? And what makes it worse too is that the first half of this novel, a good 200 pages, are devoted to the characters performing this play, and it's a very silly play, filled with very silly characters, and it's funny sometimes, but it's also just, the values are so dissonant, because the older generation really don't want these young people to put on this play because it's like unbecoming of them or something. I don't even know, but it doesn't feel as important as anything that happens in any of the other Austen novels. It's like an Emma, where the character's trying to figure out who bought the piano for 5 chapters, but longer and sillier. So I would give this a 2 out of 5. I've only got 2 Austen novels left. I've got Persuasion and I've got Northanger Abbey. I hear that Persuasion's the best one, Northanger Abbey's the weirdest one, but they're both way shorter than this, so I am keen. Book number 4 is The Sea by John Banville. This is the aquatic novel. I just wanted aesthetic descriptions of the ocean, right? Look at this cover. It's meant to just give me some aesthetic descriptions of the ocean. It does have some of that. It also has just a wild childhood romance where the narrator is like 10 years old and is lusting after the mother of the other 2 kids who are with him at this beachside resort. And I don't know, is this meant to be relatable? Is that, I don't know what it's trying to do. Like, is the author saying that all young men lust after somebody else's mothers, or is this meant to be an aberrant character? But why? I was so confused. And those scenes made me very strangely uncomfortable, but also confused, because what for? And also, what is it trying to say? I had a lot of trouble interpreting this, because I was putting it into the same scope as a lot of the other Man Booker winners. This won the Man Booker Prize in 2005. Putting the scope of things like A Sense of the Ending, The Radiance of the Day, books about memory, about childhood, like it has all these same tropes and themes in it. But why? I was so confused. If anyone else has read this book and has enjoyed this book, tell me, why do you like it? Because I'm looking on Goodreads and I've seen people give it 5 stars and say, if you don't like this book, then you're just not smart enough for it. I don't know. What is there to get? I was so confused. I give this a 2 out of 5. And if it was just descriptions of the ocean, I would have enjoyed it a lot more. The author's got good chops, right? His sentences are good, the images are good. I zipped through it really fast, but I don't know. Book number 6, this is published in 2023. I Have Some Questions for You by Rebecca Makkai. This is going to make a lot of money. This is like, in a year's time, everybody's going to be watching it on Netflix or something. Some streaming service is going to snatch it right up because it's got money written all over it, right? It's a dark academia, true crime themed murder mystery that is set in this posh boarding school where it has all of the, I guess, the cultural trappings of both the 1980s and the current era. It stars teenagers. It's well plotted. It keeps you guessing. I want to say it's enjoyable, but really what I want to say is it's commercial. It will make a lot of money. It will make an investor very happy one day. And it seems very silly for me to say this because I'm not here judging how much money a book is worth, right? But this one, as I'm reading it, constantly I'm just thinking, people would dig this. Like, I could sell this very easily to very many people. So I think it's blowing up on YouTube at the moment, blowing up on like Book Talk and whatever. I hope it is, because it would make all the sense for it to. It's quite enjoyable. We follow Bodhi Kane. She's going back to her old boarding school. She's got some trauma in her own, not past life, but like her childhood, right? She's got some childhood trauma, and she's trying to teach some kids about podcasting because she's a true crime podcaster. But one of the topics that she raises is actually the murder of her dorm mate from back when she was attending the school. So we've got all of these layers of mystery going on there. We've got past and present, and for what it's worth, this novel has like 40 characters, and all of them are represented quite easily and well. It's very easy to figure out who's who and what's happening. It's also very easy to figure out the jumps back and forwards in time, even though there's like something like 5 timelines in this book. It's, for how complex it is really nicely sequenced together, and what could have been a very convoluted mess is instead just really streamlined, really gets you going. The pacing is really quite wonderful, and just all the characters all come together to form these very accurate portraits of the 1980s and the 2000s and the 2020s. I think this novel also does a really great job at representing the internet. So characters, there's a big plot arc about Twitter and getting cancelled on Twitter, which I thought was very funny. It's very current. They try their best to be true to both teenagers then and teenagers now. It does still have that kind of like Euphoria High adults writing teenagers feel, but it does it in an acceptable way, right? It's not in a cringy way. It's more just in like a everything else that's commercial is doing it this way. So it's not garish, or it doesn't ruin the suspension of disbelief. So I read it very fast. I read 400 pages in like 3 days, got straight through it. It's very enjoyable. If you just want a page turner, this one will do it for you. So I give it a 4 out of 5. Book number 6 is On the Road by Jack Kerouac. I don't know what I wanted out of this book. I knew what it was. I knew that it's a kind of an autofictive representation of the Beat Generation mentality in the 1960s. Authors like Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg, other people just riding around America and being free, right? Enjoying the land, enjoying their youth, enjoying that society. I think the trappings of that era often don't get talked about very much because this book was in many ways the first of its kind, and from this so much more in the space of autofiction and I guess culture infused fiction came out, making this feel a little bit obsolete. I think the problem with this book is that it's so trapped in the cultural footnotes of that era, and because the masculine narrator is just so dismissive of everybody around him. There's so many women that try to engage with these characters or to help these characters or to form some kind of meaningful relationship with these characters, and the men are just like, no, right? The men just leave. And it's so horrible reading about these men whose definition of freedom has to do with them escaping the confines of society and just being awful to the people who actually seem to try to care about them. I just felt so bad for everybody reading this. And like, sure, you had your good times, you went to Mexico, you realized the meaning of life, right? But at what cost? You know, you're not a good person. I feel bad for saying this because if you like this book, I'm not calling you a bad person. I'm not calling the author of this book a bad person. I am, by all means, calling the narrator of the book a bad person. I don't know if that's the intention of the book to say that, or to show the damage and the cost of this kind of lifestyle. But gosh, I'm worried if you read this book and you think, yes, I want to be exactly like Dean Moriarty and South Paradise, right? Like, if that's who you model your life on, I'm very, very worried for you and everybody that you connect with. It's a 2 out of 5. Okay, and last one for April. Wow, we got through these really quick this time. The Time Traveler's Wife by Audrey Niffenegger. This is it's a frustratingly American book. It is a very, very American book. It reminds me a lot of The 5 People You Meet in Heaven, in that it's a very simple story that is made complex by a contrivance. And with 5 People You Meet in Heaven, the contrivance is the afterlife, and this one, the contrivance is time travel, right? We meet Henry, who has this weird disease that shoots him back and forwards in time, and he's married to Claire, who is just this understanding woman who also doesn't really have any personality to herself. She's an artist, she's, that's it, and she's good at sex, as according to the novel. That's like the 2 character traits that I would ascribe to her. But aside from that, I'm just like, it's a very ordinary story. If you didn't have the time travel, it would just be the most basic American dream romance, where the man and the woman meet when they're young or like in school, and then the girl goes through some kind of trauma, gets sexually assaulted, so the guy has to like go physically beat them up with violence, and because of that they form a relationship, they get a house, they have kids, they like get married, have one set of friends. It's just so ordinary. It's so overwhelmingly ordinary. But now we have this narrator who zips back and forward in time, and for what it's worth, the time travel itself is actually really interesting. So it's not multiverse, and it's also not chaos theory. It's the sense that everything that will ever happen is already predetermined, which means that the main character's time traveling is part of his predetermined life, so that he knows what can happen, but he actually has basically zero control over how it plays out or what ends up happening. But he affects the events that happen in the future because he can go back into the past and tell people about what happens in the future, and yet if he wants to change something, he can't, because that's fixed in terms of fate. It's actually pretty unique. I can't think of any other time travel text that does it this way, to suggest that the entirety of mankind and history is a series of fixed events that you can't really change, kind of like in the Greek tragedy Fates scenario. But also, if you have a time traveler, their actions factor into this unchanging fate. It's hard to describe. It's interesting, but the book is quite good at teaching you how this works, and for what it's worth, it's not wonky, right? I never had a moment where I go, wait, hold on, it's bending the rules of time travel here a little bit. The time travel rules are rigid all the way through, which is what makes this novel quite effective and emotional, because midway through the novel, you're already familiar with how time travel works. So later in the novel, when there's higher stakes, right, when there's older characters, when they know tragedy is about to happen, then these time travel moments, because they follow the rules of time travel in this novel so strictly, you don't feel like there's any chance of reprieve or any chance of like some kind of magic Deus Ex Machina here to save everybody. Instead, the time travel almost feels like a kind of terminal illness, in the same way that, I guess, a different novel might have a protagonist with terminal illness. Here, it's how it works and how it feels, and it does try to milk that drama. I'm not gonna lie, like it really wants to make you cry. It's very transparent in that. And because of that transparency, I thought I didn't have the same kind of emotional response as something else, right? It wasn't sad in the way that Norwegian Wood was sad. Norwegian Wood was sad because the characters were so well defined and the metaphors and symbols were very clear. The inevitability of these characters and the realness of them was what made that book sad. This book, the characters are not real. This book, I cannot possibly fathom these two people existing. They're too like storybook, right? They're just part of the American national individual myth. But surely there's no real people that are anything like this. So I had a hard time really feeling sadness towards them because I just didn't believe they exist. And the time traveling didn't help. The time traveling makes it even harder to believe that these are real people. But in spite of all of that, towards the ending, you do feel it, right? You do feel it a little bit. And I think maybe, because I'm not the target audience for this, absolutely, if you are okay with a nothing female protagonist and that stereotypical rugged American man, masculine protagonist, if that's what you wanted anyway, then maybe this book will get something out of you. But I'm making a lot of concessions here. It's a 2 out of 5. Okay, and that's everything for April. Gosh, did I get through all of that in 20 minutes? That is very out of character for me. But okay, that's alright. I can edit it and send it off more quickly. This is 7 books, and I will be back with another 7 next month. So, yeah, that's all I have to say, really. And before I forget, here's a Gravity's Rainbow update. So, I have not forgotten about this novel, although I am not very far into it. I've read about 200 pages, so past the first chapter, or past the first section, and midway into the second section, something really graphic just happened in the second section, and it's making me wonder what's the point of it all. But I'm enjoying it, actually. I'm enjoying it more than I thought I would. I think just the basic premise of section 1 and section 2 is just so outlandishly bizarre and funny that I just want to know what happens, right? I just want to know how they're going to deal with this man who causes explosions every time he sleeps with someone. It's so funny, but it's trying to be so serious, but I'm sure that the author is aware of just how incredibly funny this is, and it's hard. I don't like reading it. I will read 40 pages in one day and go, I don't really understand any of this, but I feel like I can get through it. I'm really surprised myself. I didn't think this was a book that I would ever read in my lifetime, and I'm making progress. And I've even heard that the later parts of this book are a bit easier than the early parts, so yeah, I'll make it through. Pretty good. I feel like I've forgotten to do a proper outro, so if this is weirdly edited on, I'm not sorry. But thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next month. Okay, goodbye!